I have a very strong influence towards that type of thing in the respect that it intrigues me, but I don't delve in it.
Ozzy Osbourne was more than a rock star. He helped create the sound and spirit of heavy metal. Behind the wild image and crazy moments was a man who carried a lot of pain, loss, and hard times. After his death, many people spoke up, but Robert Plant stayed quiet. Now the rock legend has finally shared his thoughts, and what he said has surprised many. His words don't just praise Ozzy, they help us understand who he really was. What makes one legend's honest words about another so powerful? Join us as we explore what Robert Plant has revealed about the late Ozzy Osbourne. From darkness to stardom, Ozzy Osbourne may be known as the Prince of Darkness, the wild frontman of Black Sabbath, and one of the most unforgettable faces in rock. But what many don't realize is, Ozzy carried an unsettled look in his eyes, even in his younger years. That look came from where he came from and what he went through. He was born on December 3, 1948, in Marston Green, near Birmingham, England. His real name was John Michael Osbourne, and he was the fourth of 6 children in a working-class family. They lived in a small 2-bedroom home in Aston, a poor part of Birmingham, and space was always tight.
That's all it is, just a name, Black Sabbath.
Well, what do you do to relax?
Smoke marijuana.
His father, Jack, worked night shifts as a toolmaker. His mother, Lillian, worked days at a car components factory. There was hardly enough money and even less peace. Growing up, Ozzy struggled at school. He had dyslexia, something that wasn't widely understood at the time. Teachers didn't know how to handle it, and classmates weren't kind. He was often teased for not being able to read well, for stammering, and for failing to keep up. Education quickly became a place of shame instead of support. Ozzy left school by age 15 with no qualifications. But behind those academic struggles was something even far more damaging.
But right now, right here, today, I'm great.
At the age of 11, Ozzy was the victim of abuse by someone in his local area. He kept it hidden for decades and only spoke about it much later in life. He did not name the person nor go into full detail, but he said it left emotional wounds that stayed with him. It was a part of his life he rarely discussed, but one that clearly shaped much of what came next. At home, things weren't much better. The Osbournes lived tightly packed and often stressed. Ozzy tried different jobs after leaving school. He worked at a car horn factory, a slaughterhouse, and even as a plumber's assistant. But none of it seemed to fit. He also had brushes with the law during his teens. He was arrested for burglary and briefly served time in prison when he couldn't pay the fine.
The cop goes, when you finish shaking that thing, mister, your ass is in jail. I was thrown in jail till 6 o'clock in the morning, and as I got out of jail.
The experience was humiliating and cold. He later said the shame of stealing to survive stayed with him. Amid all of this, music was one thing that made sense to him. From the moment he heard the Beatles, something clicked. Their song, She Loves You, struck him so hard that he knew music was where he belonged. He admired John Lennon in particular, saying that Lennon's honesty in music gave him something to hold on to. He started singing at home, joining local bands, and dreaming of a life beyond Birmingham. Interestingly, Robert Plant, who also grew up in the West Midlands, was just a few years older than Ozzy. While their paths didn't cross deeply in childhood, they both came from the same environment: industrial towns, strict homes, and few opportunities. In later years, Plant acknowledged the tough background that many young musicians from Birmingham had to fight through. Though their music styles were different, the struggle to rise from working-class hardship was something they shared.
Part of the show that I thought was funny when Lola the Bulldog puked.
For Ozzy, those early years were defining. The poverty, the trauma, the learning difficulties, and the rejection all played a part in shaping the performer the world would come to know. Before the fame, the tours, and the controversies, there was a boy trying to survive in a world that rarely gave him a break. Ozzy's first real step toward a music career came in the late 1960s when he teamed up with Geezer Butler to form a short-lived band called Rare Breed. The group didn't last long, but it opened the door to something much bigger. Soon after, they joined forces with Tony Iommi and Bill Ward, and in 1968, they formed what would become Black Sabbath. At first, they called themselves Earth, but after realizing another band already had that name, they changed it. The name Black Sabbath was taken from a horror film playing in a nearby cinema, and it matched their sound. The group leaned into heavy riffs, eerie tones, and dark themes. It was music that reflected the rough industrial world they came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Come on! Come on!
Most bands at the time sang about peace and love. Black Sabbath didn't. They sang about war, madness, addiction, and fear. Their debut album, Black Sabbath, was released in 1970. It opened with the sound of thunder and church bells, followed by slow, heavy guitar that hadn't been heard before in rock music. Critics were confused. Some called it noise. Others said it was evil. But the fans heard something different. They connected with the raw energy, the darkness, and the pain in Ozzy's voice. It felt honest. Later that same year, the band released their second album, Paranoid. It featured songs like Iron Man, War Pigs, and the title track, Paranoid. This album pushed them into the spotlight. It reached #1 in the UK and made a mark in the US as well. Even though critics still dismissed them, fans showed up in large numbers.
But right now, right here, today, I'm great.
The music carried meaning for people who felt lost, or angry, or unheard. Ozzy wasn't trained as a singer in the usual sense. He didn't have a polished voice, but he had emotion. You could hear the struggle in his delivery. Every show felt like an emotional release. People connected to that. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just trying to survive, and music became the way he did it. Through this period, Robert Plant, who had already begun rising to fame with Led Zeppelin, was watching. Both Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin came out of the same region, just miles apart, and often faced similar judgments from the press. While Led Zeppelin was labeled as too loud, Sabbath was called dangerous, but both groups pushed forward. Over the years, Plant would speak about the importance of that local music scene and how it shaped the future of British rock. Black Sabbath continued to build their reputation across Europe and the United States. They were creating something new, something heavier, darker, and rooted in personal pain.
Sorry?
Does it make you feel uncomfortable when you talk about it?
Well, it's not exactly one of my greatest achievements.
For Ozzy, this was about survival. But how long can someone carry that much weight before it begins to break them? A turbulent journey. Ozzy's departure from Black Sabbath in 1979 could have ended his career. Many thought he wouldn't survive on his own, but instead, he surprised everyone. With help from Sharon Arden, who later became his wife, Ozzy put together a new band and began working on his solo debut.
Doves of Peace. Everybody loves doves.
He joined forces with guitarist Randy Rhoads, bassist Bob Daisley, and drummer Lee Kerslake. Together, they recorded Blizzard of Oz, released in 1980. The album was a breakthrough. It featured tracks like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley, both of which became anthems. Ozzy was no longer just the voice of Black Sabbath. He had created something of his own. In 1981, the group released Diary of a Madman. It was another success. Rhoads' guitar work drew praise from all sides, and Ozzy's energy was sharper than ever. These two albums quickly became classics of heavy metal. Fans embraced them, and Ozzy began headlining sold-out tours.
Did you have an idea that he had a crush on you?
No.
But everything changed in March 1982. While on tour in Florida, the band's bus stopped near an airstrip. A small plane was taken up for a few short joyrides. Randy Rhoads joined one of them. The plane crashed into the band's tour bus and burst into flames. Rhoads, just 25 years old, was killed instantly. The loss devastated Ozzy. Randy wasn't just a bandmate. He was a creative partner and close friend. In the weeks that followed, Ozzy struggled to cope. He drank heavily. He lashed out. He canceled shows, then performed others through tears. People around him grew worried. The press painted him as unstable. Stories of wild behavior and substance abuse filled headlines. But those close to him saw that behind the chaos was a man trying to survive unimaginable loss in the public eye. He kept touring, not because he was thriving,
and make a mistake of biting a head off a bat. And I tell you what, guys, it ain't fun when you get them rabies shot.
but because he didn't know how else to deal with the pain. In those years, Ozzy became both a symbol of heavy metal and a subject of concern. He bit the head off a bird during a promotional event. Later, during a live show, he bit the head off a bat thrown on stage. These acts became part of his legend, but they also raised questions about his state of mind. Meanwhile, Robert Plant, who had lost his own son in the late 1970s and seen Led Zeppelin fall apart soon after, knew something about grief. He once remarked that performing while grieving was like holding your breath underwater, necessary but exhausting. The rock world didn't always offer space to slow down. Ozzy pressed forward. He released more albums and worked with other talented guitarists like Jake E. Lee and later Zakk Wylde. But something had changed. Ozzy's personal life was just as turbulent as his public image. He married Thelma Riley in 1971, and they had 2 children together. He also adopted her son from a previous relationship, but the marriage was strained. Ozzy later admitted that he was a poor husband and father during that time, overwhelmed by fame and addiction. The marriage ended in divorce. In 1982, he married Sharon Arden, the daughter of music manager Don Arden. Together, they had 3 children, Amy, Kelly, and Jack. Sharon also took over managing his career, keeping him on track through some of his most difficult years. But life at home was never simple. Their relationship was intense and often rocky. Ozzy's addictions and erratic behavior sometimes pushed their marriage to the edge. Sharon once left him briefly in the early 2000s after he relapsed, yet they always returned to each other. Over time, their chaotic dynamic became part of their public identity. In the 1980s and 1990s, Ozzy was constantly in the headlines. Some saw him as a talented performer. Others saw only controversy. He was accused of promoting Satanism, largely because of his music's dark themes and imagery. Religious groups protested his concerts. The criticism peaked when he was sued by the parents of a teenager who died by suicide. They claimed that Ozzy's song "Suicide Solution" had influenced their son's decision. The case was dismissed, and Ozzy said the song was actually a warning about the dangers of alcohol. Still, the backlash stuck. He was also mocked for his slurred speech, memory problems, and frequent stumbles during interviews and appearances. It became widely known that he was battling severe alcohol and drug addiction.
One last thing, if you have any drugs or any alcohol, give me some.
Cocaine, pills, and alcohol were part of his daily routine for years. Sometimes he performed under the influence. Sometimes he forgot entire shows. The media leaned into the wild image. Ozzy was painted as unpredictable, dangerous, and out of control. But even as he stumbled publicly, he didn't hide his struggles. He spoke openly in interviews about rehab, relapses, and his own regrets. That kind of honesty was rare in an industry where most people tried to appear polished. Sharon stood by him through most of it, even when it meant facing the chaos head-on. Their home life was loud and unpredictable, filled with love, anger, and deep dysfunction. But it was also full of moments that fans could relate to: fights, reconciliations, and the long road of trying to fix what was broken. Ozzy didn't try to be a role model. He wasn't always likable, but he never pretended to be someone else. But what happens when a man known for losing control finally has to face what he's done? Farewell to the Prince of Darkness, the legacy of Ozzy Osbourne. Years of hard living finally began catching up with Ozzy. His health had been declining for a long time, but in 2020, he publicly confirmed that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The announcement didn't come as a shock to fans who had watched him move slower and struggle with speech during appearances. Still, hearing the words made it real. He also suffered from emphysema, a lung condition that made it harder for him to breathe, especially on stage. His energy dipped, and performing became a serious challenge. Then came the fall in 2019, which caused serious damage to his spine. Over the next few years, Ozzy underwent multiple spinal surgeries, each one more difficult to recover from. Tour dates were postponed, then canceled. Fans waited, hoping he'd return. But each time a show was called off, the concern grew. Ozzy, once famous for defying the odds, was running out of strength. He made rare appearances, mostly in pre-recorded messages or seated interviews. Even then, his determination still showed. He wanted to tour again. He wanted to thank fans properly, but his body had other plans. On July 22, 2025, Ozzy Osbourne passed away peacefully in his countryside home, surrounded by his family. He was 76 years old. After decades of living loudly and dangerously, his final moment was quiet and personal, far from the glare of the spotlight. News of his death spread quickly. Tributes poured in from around the world. Fans gathered in cities from Los Angeles to Tokyo, lighting candles and playing his music in the streets. But the most powerful farewell happened in his hometown. Ozzy's public funeral was held in Birmingham, the place where it all began. Thousands of fans showed up. Some brought flowers. Others brought guitars or old vinyl records. Many just came to stand with others who had loved his music for most of their lives. The streets were filled with the sound of Black Sabbath melodies, played from speakers, radios, and even by small bands that had come to pay respect. Crowds chanted his name. Ozzy! 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 It was loud, emotional, and raw, just like the man himself. Among the mourners was Robert Plant, longtime friend and fellow rock legend. While he rarely made public appearances at funerals, this was different. Fans wept. Others closed their eyes and listened. For a moment, it felt like the music had stilled the noise of the world. It was a reminder of how deep Ozzy's influence ran not just in rock music, but in the lives of the people who followed him through every high and low. And though the man was gone, his presence still lingered in every note, every memory, every crowd that ever screamed his name. Robert Plant had known Ozzy for decades. They came from the same industrial roots, both rising out of Birmingham's working-class neighborhoods to become global icons. Yet over the years, Plant had said very little about Ozzy in public. While their paths crossed often and their careers ran parallel in many ways, Plant mostly kept his thoughts private. But that changed after Ozzy's death. Following the death, Plant released a simple but moving tribute. It read, "Farewell, Ozzy. What a journey. Sail on up there. Finally at peace. You truly changed the planet of rock." The message was short, but it spoke volumes. Plant had seen Ozzy not just as a fellow performer, but as someone who had shaped the sound and soul of rock music. His words offered both admiration and peace, letting fans know how deeply he respected what Ozzy had done. Not long after the public funeral in Birmingham, Ozzy was laid to rest in a private burial. The ceremony took place near a lake on his estate. Only close family and a few friends attended. It was quiet and personal, a sharp contrast to the noise and spectacle that often followed him during his life. At that moment, Robert Plant did something no one expected. He reportedly performed "Stairway to Heaven," a song that had become a symbol of reflection and transcendence. Witnesses described it as haunting and deeply respectful. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It was a farewell from one icon to another. For Plant, it was a personal goodbye. That gesture, more than words, brought their legacies together. It was a final salute from one legend to another. Ozzy had been seen as a wild man, a showman, a shock rocker. But behind all of that was a person who had been through loss, addiction, illness, and deep personal pain. Someone who had battled through more than most, and still managed to keep making music, to keep showing up. In the end, Robert Plant made sure the world saw that side of Ozzy, not just the bat-biting, stage-stumbling rock star, but the man who lived fully, often recklessly, because there had once been no space for his voice. A man who was louder than life because he had once been ignored. A man whose pain became power and whose music told the truth when words could not. With that, the chapter closed. But the story remains. In every song, in every fan who still plays his records, and in every artist he ever inspired, Ozzy Osbourne continues to live on. What part of Ozzy's journey stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear them. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.